Chapter 8. When Jonathan awoke, he saw Kirana's face and smiled. She frowned. "What were you doing?" she said in an irritated tone. "Trying to stop William Fine," said Jonathan. "Did you?" she asked. He looked away. "No," he admitted. "Did you at least read his mind to find out where he was going?" asked Kirana. "The South Pole," said Jonathan. Kirana turned to Lucas. "How are we going to get there?" asked Kirana impatiently. "We'll need a ship," said Lucas. "The oceans in the south aren't frozen over yet, just like the oceans in the north haven't evaporated." "No salt canyons?" asked Jonathan. "You mean there's actually water out there?" "That's right," said Lucas. "All right then, where are we going to get a ship?" asked Sig with a smile. "We'll eventually hit the ocean if we keep going southwest," said Lucas. "Then we have to hope we can find something along the coast, I guess." "Why don't I scout ahead on this one?" asked Lizard. "Just don't teleport directly to the pole," said Lucas. "We need Heaven's Sword and Heaven's Shield there before we attack Abaddon." Lizard wanted to object, but he knew that Lucas was right. "Fine," he said with air quotes. "I'll just look for a ship." He immediately teleported away. "For the rest of us, we need to find a working vehicle," said Lucas. They began to spread out. Kirana could tell that Jonathan was hiding something, so she stayed close to him as they searched for a vehicle. After a few minutes of wandering through debris, she turned to him. "What else happened?" she asked. Jonathan turned in surprise. After a pause, he began to explain. "The guy in the mind realm that looks like Victor," said Jonathan slowly. "Fine knew who he was." "Is he working with Archdemon's hand?" asked Kirana. "No, he's..." started Jonathan. "Well?" asked Kirana impatiently. "His name is Michael," said Jonathan at last. "He said that he was an archangel." Kirana's eyes grew wide. "What?" asked Kirana. "He said that he is the one that made the divine keys," said Jonathan. "If there are archangels, then why aren't they fighting Abaddon?" said Kirana angrily. "I don't know," said Jonathan. "How could they let the world become the place where demon worshippers and augments prey on the innocent?" she continued. "How could they tolerate this?" "I don't know," said Jonathan. "But apparently Victor is important to his plan, whatever it is." "Yeah, why does he look like Victor?" asked Kirana angrily. "He wouldn't explain everything," said Jonathan, "but he did say that Victor has a more important role than just bearing the Heaven's Breath key. And William Fine referred to him as the Chosen One, whatever that means." Kirana pulled a lock of dark hair behind her ear. The anger on her face seemed to melt away as she thought about what Jonathan had said. "I guess," she said at last, "I guess I never really thought about why the divine keys were made in the first place." Her voice had softened to the point that Jonathan was surprised. He had been so confused with the news about Michael and Victor that he had not thought about whether it was positive or negative. He felt a bit frustrated that Michael had kept his identity and his goals hidden, as he did not see what might have changed. Of course, there was also the frustration of William Fine, who had brazenly threatened his friends and the girl he loved. That, coupled with the betrayal of Daniel Young, made him a bit numb to the revelation that Victor had some destiny to play in the plans of a mysterious archangel. "Well, I guess it doesn't change much right now," said Kirana, interrupting Jonathan's train of thought. "We still have to stop Abaddon before we do anything else." Jonathan nodded in agreement. "Hey," shouted Sig from a short distance away, "I think I found something." They looked up to see him revving the engine of a large van with a wide smile on his face. It was only a few moments before everyone was inside the vehicle, and they were driving south. Within a couple of hours, the towering cloud of smoke where the healing shrine had been was out of sight, and large white puffy clouds hovered at regular intervals in the azure sky. The cloud's shadows darkened large grassy sections on either side of the road and gave a deceptively calm and peaceful atmosphere to the earth, in spite of the threat that they chased south. "This will take days to travel," said Jennifer after another hour of driving. "Do you have a better idea?" asked Lucas sincerely. "Flying," said Jennifer. The others turned and looked at her in confusion. "What?" asked Lucas. "You know, in an airplane," clarified Jennifer. "What's an airplane?" asked Row 82. "Really?" asked Jennifer. "I don't know anything about airplanes either," said Victor. "Seriously?" she said with a smile and a tone of gentle surprise. "Large vehicles that travel through the air," said Lucas. Jennifer frowned as he interjected, but he paid no attention to her. It is true that they were significantly faster than ground-based transportation, but they also required something called runways to take off and land. "What's a runway?" asked Sig. "A long straight stretch of road that allows room to accelerate and decelerate safely," said Lucas. "That's why they stopped being used, not to mention that the habitable region of Earth in our time does not take very long to traverse." "I see," said Sig. "The problem is that it requires skill to pilot an airplane," said Lucas. "Is that a skill you have, Jennifer?" "No," she admitted with a frown. "Although it should be something that Divine Keys could help us accomplish," said Lucas. "Where is the closest airplane?" asked Sig enthusiastically. "There is an airport about 60 miles south of us," said Row 82. "How do you know that?" asked Lucas, who was genuinely curious. "I can hear the radio broadcasts," he answered. Lucas widened his eyes and gave an impressed frown. He had forgotten how he had deceived Row 82 with a radio several times. "Sounds like a plan," said Sig. "I'm not going to lie, I have always wanted to fly." Stephanie's eyes were wide with worry. She had never heard of airplanes either, but she was worried about all of the possible events that could cause a vehicle to fall out of the sky. She wondered when air temperatures created pressure variance, whether a vehicle could withstand the turbulence. She wondered how much error would be allowed by such a vehicle in its angle of ascent or descent, and whether a human pilot would be capable of maneuvering within these ranges. She wondered if a vehicle could sustain enough lift to carry all of them, plus the weight of fuel that it would take to run an engine. Lucas noticed her nervousness. "Don't worry," he whispered. "Airports would not exist if it was too unsafe." Stephanie nodded, admitting that he was right logically, but her anxiety was only slightly relieved. It was not long before they approached the airport. The tall control tower and the roar of jet engines were impressive to the group from the future. They pulled up to signs that designated the area for loading and unloading only. They abandoned the van there. "Hey, no parking!" shouted a uniformed man. Jonathan's eyes glowed brightly. "It's okay," he whispered. "Yeah, I guess it's okay," replied the officer. Kirana smiled as they continued into the airport. A number of security officers approached them as they noticed the numerous weapons they were carrying. "I'm sorry, but you will not be able to take those weapons with you," said one of the officers. "We don't have time for this," said Jennifer with a frown. Her eyes began glowing and the officers approaching them slowed down to a crawl. "Let's go." In a few minutes they had made their way beyond the security screeners and were walking through the airport. Jennifer's eyes ceased glowing and she began breathing heavily. Victor put his arm around her to help steady her after her exhausting time slow. "Where are we going?" asked Sig. "There is a hangar with private jets out there," pointed Row 82. "That's our best bet." The small group rushed out a gate and hurried toward the hangar. One of the small planes was being towed toward a gate. "That one has been fueled recently," said Row 82 as his eyes glowed. They rushed after it. "Where is it going?" asked Sig. "To pick up a passenger," said Lucas, pointing to a dark-colored vehicle approaching the plane. They rushed up to the vehicle. Suddenly machine gun fire erupted from the car. They scattered to find cover. "What are they doing?" exclaimed Victor. "Is it airport security?" asked Jennifer, who was still a bit short of breath. "No," said Row 82 with a frown. "It's William Fine." Stephanie's eyes began glowing as she rushed toward the vehicle. She stepped and spun perfectly to avoid taking any fire. Sig gripped his key, and a large golden wall materialized in front of the others, preventing any bullets from traveling toward them. "Stop, Stephanie!" shouted Jonathan. Though she was able to recognize the sound of his voice, even with the loud gunfire, she ignored him and pressed forward. Jonathan did not want Fine to gain control of any of them again, and he instantly leapt into the mind realm. Even with the damage that Jonathan had done, the monster representing William Fine appeared to have a large number of tentacles that it had regrown. "Already?" asked Jonathan to no one in particular in a disappointed tone. He pulled out his key and transformed it to his katana. "Sam!" shouted Jonathan. His devoted companion shrieked in response as it dove down and grabbed his outstretched arm. "You're at a disadvantage," shouted the monster. From within the tentacle swarm above its towering head, it revealed its grip on Stephanie Mason. "And I had no idea she could do this," added the monster. "It's almost as good as the demon prophetess." "Let her go," demanded Jonathan. "Why would I do that?" chided the creature. Jonathan's sword began glowing, and in a moment, the massive flaming blade he had used against it previously was ready again. He tossed Sam up into the air, and she let out a shriek. "You cannot blindside me this time," said William. "I know what you will do." Sam shrieked and Jonathan lunged, but William dodged the attack perfectly. Sam followed up with a diving attack, but William dodged it. He roared with laughter. "This is truly phenomenal," he exclaimed as he continued dodging Sam and Jonathan. The flurry of offense was cut short as the creature slapped Sam with a tentacle and threw her back. She was able to slow her descent, but she tumbled against the ground. "Sam!" exclaimed Jonathan as he rushed toward her. "Fascinating," said William. "All this time I thought that Sarah Hawkins was telling us our unavoidable destinies." Jonathan gently picked her up. She cried softly and shook her head, as if readying herself to fight again. "Don't get too close, Sam," whispered Jonathan. "He's dangerous." The hawk cried softly and leapt up into the air, building her altitude again. "Take your own advice," whispered William, who had crept up behind Jonathan. Jonathan gasped as he spun around, but he was not in time to defend himself from the tentacle slap that threw him back. Outside the mind realm, Kirana watched a drop of blood ooze out of Jonathan's nose. She furrowed her brow angrily and gripped her key. It began glowing brightly. Security forces from the airport had come down and were shooting at everyone, even after seeing Sig's golden shield. He had expanded his shield to fold around the exposed flank, but not before Lucas had been hit. Victor and Jennifer were tending to him, but he had not regained consciousness. Row 82 had been the only one not doing something else that could try and return fire, but he was unable to penetrate Fine's vehicle. Stephanie had turned to face them, and Row 82 instantly knew that she was under William Fine's control. "She's a puppet," shouted Row 82. "Stephanie," whispered Sig in anger. A moment later, Kirana swung her massive sword and sliced the car in half. She swung upwards and threw William Fine from his vehicle. Stephanie slumped to the asphalt the moment that William Fine slammed against the ground. "What happened?" whispered Jonathan as he regained consciousness. "That's what I was going to ask," whispered Lucas as he opened his eyes. Victor breathed a sigh of relief. Kirana rushed up to Jonathan and helped him up. "He just suddenly vanished," said Jonathan. "I think he hit his head," said Kirana as she steadied him. Sig walked as he extended his golden shield to protect everyone from the machine gun fire coming from the security guards. "Victor," shouted Sig, "can you get Stephanie?" Victor rushed toward her. "Lucas, Row 82," shouted Sig. "Let's get on the plane." "How?" asked Jonathan. "You have to get the pilot to open the door," said Jennifer. Jonathan's eyes began glowing. After a minute, the door opened and lowered. They quickly rushed past the pilot onto the plane as Sig gave them cover. "What do we do with this guy?" asked Row 82, pointing to the pilot. "I've got an idea," said Lucas. He gripped his key and placed his hand on the pilot's head. After a few moments, Lucas's eyes stopped glowing. "Okay, I've got what I need. Let's drop him off. I don't want to put him in danger." Row 82 gradually helped the unconscious pilot onto the ground before rushing back up onto the aircraft. "Okay, Sig," said Row 82. "It's time to go." Sig grinned widely and leapt up. The machine gun fire stopped as the door closed. "What now?" asked Sig excitedly. "Everyone find a seat," said Lucas. He rushed to the cockpit and strapped on the pair of headphones that had been left. Radio operators were screaming for confirmation, but Lucas only smiled at their confusion. The pilot's experience was fresh in his mind, and he flipped a series of switches and checked the lights and gauges as though he had done it hundreds of times previously. Victor buckled Stephanie into one of the seats before finding a seat next to Jennifer. She had a wide smile. He could not help but return the smile. He looked back at Stephanie, wondering if she would be okay. As he remembered her anxiety, he thought that it might be best that she was unable to hear Lucas's voice over the intercom, telling the passengers to prepare for takeoff. "And passenger Jonathan Knight, if you could report to the cockpit," said Lucas over the intercom. "I'm going to need some help persuading air traffic control to allow us the use of the runway." Jonathan smiled and walked up to join Lucas. As he looked outside the plane, he noticed small carts carrying armed security forces were approaching. Lucas was turning the plane toward the runway. Jonathan gripped his key and went into the mind realm. Lucas smiled as he watched the carts crash into one another. He steered the plane toward the runway. Sig laughed as the plane began to accelerate. Slowly and gently the nose tilted up, and the plane lifted off of the ground.